One. All right, greetings and welcome to another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology podcast. My name is Kerry Miller, joined as always by my good friend Graham Doran, who I don't know if the label on the Zoom video shows up on the video or not, but he is today Kerry's BFF. I love it. Today we are going to be breaking from tradition a little bit. Our loyal listeners, both of them, will know that usually we focus on the major conferences, but I wanted to really hit on the mid majors here, the teams who, by and large, fair or not, their resumes are not going to improve from this point forward. They're just in preservation mode. So we're going to start in the AAC, kind of work our way alphabetically through there. So the big one in the AAC is Memphis, who is threatening to be Memphis of yesteryear. Graham, where do you have Memphis now, and how do you feel about them moving forward?
I have Memphis as a 6 seed right now, and I feel pretty good about it. I think they have the quality wins that you can't ignore, but the deficiencies are becoming more and more evident. The predictive metrics told us to expect some performances like this, and they're just struggling in really almost every game they're playing in the AAC. Really just not putting enough points on the board. So I think Memphis, for now, is a solid 6 seed to me. But moving forward, I think you're probably going to see Memphis comfortably in the field, but probably moving closer towards that 8-9 game by the time we get to Selection Sunday.
Yeah, they are not looking great by any means. I'm trying to do the old share screen here and bring up just the AAC in general, which is a testament to the lack of opportunity they will have the rest of the way. Only one team in the net top 112. None of those teams is even remotely in the at-large conversation. Their loss came at Temple, so at least it was the 112 team. But any loss the rest of the way, unless it's North Tech, and I don't think they even play North Texas again, do they? They already beat them at home. I don't know if they get them on the road. No. So unless they face North Texas in the AAC tournament, not going to be really any opportunity to improve the resume whatsoever. Um, looked very iffy. Who they play? They had a close game against East Carolina, Wichita State the other day. Yeah, that was what a combined 47 turnovers or something in that game. Just ugly, ugly basketball that they had to scrape out yet another win. Saw them do it last year, right? It was around this time. I think it was January 18th is when they started to plummet and just lost like 8 of their last 15 games. At least they're winning them so far this year. So I agree they're a 6 seed right now. And it feels like every loss they take is at least a full seed line drop moving forward. But the other team that's a little interesting in here, more so for metrics rankings than anything they've actually accomplished, North Texas. Well, talking metrics wise, right? We've discussed this. We don't know if we brought it up this year, but last year the worst resume metrics average to make the tournament was Rutgers 3 years ago at 57 and a half. So North Texas is like just barely above that threshold. Their net is fine, their quality metrics are fine, but they don't have any great wins. Is North Texas even remotely on your board right now?
I currently have them as a long shot, and I think that's where they're going to stay. If North Texas is able to just run through the American, I think their wins above bubble rating is going to be high enough that it would be enough to get a tournament bid. But the odds of doing that aren't great. So that's really kind of where I'm at. Is I think the possibility is there, but right now all they're really looking at is a 3-point home win over Oregon State. And if that's all you've really got to point to the committee, you're going to have to just load up on a really, really good overall record. And the odds of doing that are really tough.
I think they almost have to win out, as we already said. They don't play Memphis again unless that comes up in the AAC tournament, and that would almost certainly be in the championship game. I would assume they'll be 1 and 2. But yeah, I can't see North Texas getting in, but they are at least on my board. They have to be considered. Because if they did play Memphis and won, that would be great. They just don't get that opportunity again. So AAC, unless Memphis loses that tournament, most likely going to be a one bid league. Let's go to another likely one bid league in the A10, which is sad to see. Usually that's a pretty good league, but just Nobody stands out right now. These are the only three teams really even worth considering: VCU, Dayton, and George Mason, and they are all 60 or worse in the resume metrics. Which of those teams do you have in? I believe I have Mason as a 12 seed because they are technically leading the conference, but VCU feels like the best profile of the bunch.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of interesting comparison. George Mason, I do have as a 12 as the automatic bid out of the A10. But I think the VCU Dayton discussion is where it gets a little bit more interesting because I do think VCU is the better team, but they didn't really do much out of conference, and that's going to be hard to overcome. Whereas Dayton has those two marquee wins, one of which isn't looking quite as great over UConn neutral court, but the win over Marquette still looks really good. I think Marquette's either a 2 or 3 seed based on kind of what your personal preference is there. But I think looking forward, VCU probably has the best path to having a good record and maybe winning that A10 title. But then Dayton having those two quality wins, I think, is maybe a little bit of a differentiator. So if I'm the A10, I want Dayton to win the regular season because I think they would end up getting a bid if they can win the regular season title. I just think VCU has the better shot of actually doing that. So might not be good news for the A10 in general because it's just not looking good. The team that I think is most likely to win the championship is unfortunately the team that has the worst at-large consideration from their out-of-conference play.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it 2 months ago. VCU pretty much blew their chance in the Charleston Classic, losing to Seton Hall, by far their worst loss of the season, and then dropping one to Nevada, which didn't feel bad at the time, has turned into a pretty bad loss. George Mason is interesting, though. They remind me of South Florida from last year, right? Where they picked up a couple of really ugly losses early in the season and then turned things around, ended up having they had the best record in the AAC last year, I think. I know we had to project them in at some point along the way, and they got interesting, but all along it felt like the committee was going to ultimately leave them out because of what happened to them in November, because those wins count the same, even though it feels like they were forever ago. And I think those losses to East Carolina and Central Michigan will ultimately keep Mason out unless they're able to. They still have that road game against VCU. That would be big. They already won at Dayton. So they've got chances, but again, all three of these teams are 60th or worse in the resume metrics, so not likely that the A10 is going to produce a strong candidate for a bid.
You
What's
know,
next
um,
alphabetically? Oh,
just
go ahead, go.
following up on VCU, I think
Yeah,
you mentioned Seton Hall loss, and those all count the same. That has aged horribly, but I think even from an optics standpoint, it's worse than it maybe is even on paper because Seton Hall is so clearly outmatched every single time they step on the floor in the Big East. So how do you get to VCU on the bubble and say if you're looking at that and trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, Seton Hall is not. You'd be better off losing to Central Michigan, like you mentioned for George Mason, because Seton Hall has had so many opportunities to prove that they're a very, very bad basketball team in comparison to power conference teams. And you're even seeing coaches in the league talking about how bad their NIL is and how it's not really fair that they have to step onto the same court as the rest of the Big East. Having that loss from an optics standpoint really couldn't be worse for VCU.
yeah, that's right up there with any AAC team that would lose to Boston College or Virginia Tech or Miami this year. But at least those ACC teams have opportunities. They get to play Duke, probably North Carolina, Pitt, whatever. VCU doesn't have that, so they probably have to sweep the two games against Dayton. They probably have to win the home game against George Mason. Like they almost have to win out to have a real chance, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
back to Dayton really quick. I think the key for
yes,
them will be getting their quadrant splits better than they currently are. And what I mean by that is they have the good wins, right? The UConn and the Marquette wins. Those aren't going anywhere. But their
right.
problem right now, even more than the metrics, I don't think the metrics will be what ends up keeping them out. If they end up not making the tournament, it's going to be that 3-4 record against quad one and quad two. Even having a couple of bad losses, they can overcome that, but they have to show those two wins weren't abnormal. They have to show that they can beat the solid teams in the A10 such that they have at least a 500 record in quad one and quad two, if not above that. So to me, that's what I'm really watching for with Dayton. It's not the metrics, it's whether they can prove they win more often than they lose when they're playing good competition.
I think between those two really good wins and the win they should have had against North Carolina in Maui, I think they proved that a month into the season they were a really good team, but they're just not that team anymore. So they need to do something to show that the last 6 weeks of play is that's the outlier as opposed to what happened early in the season. Like they need to not just beat teams, they need to start stomping teams to prove that they are that quality team again.
That Duquesne road win was a good start. We'll see how they go from there.
When has a Duquesne road win ever been good? Speaking of at Duquesne, here we go. UC Irvine, baby. That horrible loss that they suffered, and they added another one last night against UC Riverside. We were going to originally try and do the pod last night, and I was like, there's most of the WCC's playing, UC Irvine's playing. We might as well wait until today, and glad we did. Now we have a different thought on the Anteaters in general. Um, Prior to that loss, I had them above the Dayton play-in games. Like they were my 41 overall seed. I thought that they had a very strong chance to get in at large if necessary. Now, probably not. They basically need to win every game until running into UC San Diego in the Big West Championship if they're going to get in at large. Do you agree or do you think there's a path? Because the metrics are still pretty solid.
I think there's a path, but I agree this took away the wiggle room, so now they really need to basically win out. They've won every single home win that they have is in quad four, so that's kind of interesting when you're looking at their schedule. The Road Warriors, they lost last night, but they still have 10 wins away from home in quads one, two, and three. So I think that will get a lot of respect from the committee. The key for them is going to be, again, posting that immaculately strong wins above bubble ranking, that overall record, because if they don't have that, there's really not the quality wins to point to. It's going to come down to, do they have the quantity of wins to justify a bid?
Yeah, devoid of the great wins. I mean, what was it like the Northwest Pacific Slam or whatever when they faced that Kennesaw State, Kent State, Towson run like that. That was the old school boosting your RPI type of situation where they had three decent wins away from home against teams in that 150 range. That's what you wanted to do in the olden days. Now you got to, blow out teams in the 300 range, and that's not really UCI's game. That's why their resume metrics, right? They're 34th, although I think that's a little bit off because something happened with Torvik and the NCAA data. I forget what their WAB actually is, but it's still strong. They're still well above top 40 resume metrics, but their predictives are very low because they're a defensive team. They're not going to run up the score. They're more, they're kind of like Drake in that regard where they want to beat you 64-60 or something like that. And I think that could ultimately hurt them. The fact that, even their games aren't quad one for opponents playing them on the road, or excuse me, playing them at home. So I don't know, but I think that what they did in non-conference play, like you said, they racked up road wins, neutral wins. That could help, but yeah, now having two quad three losses and only having that one particularly good win, I think it's going to be really tough for them to get in. What's next alphabetically? The Missouri Valley MVC. Do you think this is a two-bid league, Graham?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say it's unlikely to be a two-bid league, but it's close. And I think it's going to come down to, obviously, Drake and Bradley are the two that we're looking at. And it's going to come down to whether one of them is a clear champion and just basically runs away with the conference. If they do that and they lose in the tournament, I think they're going to be good.
Yeah, I think Drake winning that tournament where VCU fell flat on its face, getting that win over Vanderbilt, that could be an ultimate bubble game. I saw, was it yesterday, 2 days ago? Rothstein was tweeting out tournament odds, and Vanderbilt was listed yes at minus 235, We can take a little break from mid-major talk. Do you think Vanderbilt has a 70% chance of making the tournament? That was
I,
an odd one
I
to
think
me.
that's too high. I think that's too high. But it leads me directly into this conversation, which is why you wanted to talk about it in the first place. It's very simple for me. Drake has very good quad splits, and they have that win over Vanderbilt. If you really believe, like I do, that Vanderbilt's like a 9 or a 10 seed quality team, that win has to matter. When you combine Drake being 2-0 against quad 1, 3-1 against quads 1 and 2, and only one loss outside of in quads 3 and 4, I think that win over Vanderbilt is a total resume changer for them because it adds a little bit of heft to not just the quad splits, but feeling like they've got that win over a tournament team on a neutral court. That's where the tournament's played. I think when you just put that story together, it makes a lot of sense that Drake has an at-large quality resume right now.
Yeah, I really do think it could come down to Drake versus Vanderbilt for that last spot. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. This is where it gets interesting for Drake. These five teams right here, right, all in that 100 to 140 range. Road games against top 135, right? That's quad two. That's what they need to build up more than anything. Like they've got the quad one wins. They need to avoid the quad four losses. But if they can get those wins at Northern Iowa, at Illinois, Chicago, what have you, that's going to push them in. They're my first team out right now, and it was really close. I think they either one, like Bradley and Drake, have very similar, as you can see. Their nets, their resume metrics are almost the same. They're quad, but it's that quad one. That's where Drake is very clearly the more likely at-large candidate from the Missouri Valley. I think that is the path. We talk about that all the time. Like, what's the best way for these teams with two good teams to get in? I think they want Drake to beat Bradley and really increase their at-large case, and then Bradley to win the conference tournament so that Drake has a better chance of getting in. But I
Yeah,
think there's a pretty decent chance that if only because the SEC is going to continue to beat itself up because the Big East and ACC aren't really putting anything forward. Like I, I think I think there's a chance both get in.
yeah, I have right now Drake considered to be in my upper bubble, whereas I have Bradley in my lower bubble. So I think they both truly are bubble teams, but Drake has separated themselves as the more likely candidate. And that's projecting forward because it's not just based on what have you done so far. It's, what are you going to have opportunities for in the future? Where are your potential pitfalls by having some bad losses? I just think that that win over Vanderbilt is truly the thing that could put Drake into the tournament.
How many tiers do you have at this point? Upper bubble, lower bubble? You at seven?
I've got near lock, probably in, or no, near lock, very likely, probably in, good shape, upper bubble, lower bubble, and long shot. So I think we're at 8.
You just got to add a few more. Get up to 16 for me, all right?
I've got eight
Uh,
eight categories, and I still get questions about why is this team upper bubble versus lower bubble. So, like maybe 8 categories isn't enough.
It's the same with seed lines, right? You never have just the perfect splits. It's never just groups of four that are supposed to be perfectly separated. But anyway, moving on to the Mountain West. I still have five of these teams on my board. Even though, as we mentioned, you got to get your resume average up into the top 60 to really have any chance. Boise State, 82, Colorado State, 83. They're both several games below 500 against quads one and two. They both have a quad four loss, but they have opportunity, right? They can beat Utah State, San Diego State, New Mexico. So I'm like, I don't think either of them is anywhere close right now, but I still think there's a chance. Whereas other teams that could be in the mid-major, like Liberty and Lipscomb, like they're not going to have a chance to improve their resumes. But I think Boise State and Colorado State could. Do I believe they will? No. I think it's probably a three-bid league at most. But um, let's see. Torvik has Utah State as a 7, San Diego State and New Mexico both as 11s. How do you feel about those three spots?
I think Utah State is right about there. I have them as an 8 seed, but I think that's just about right. San Diego State as an 11 is maybe a little harsh to me. I think a 10 seed might be more appropriate. especially considering the Houston neutral court win. That looks better all the time. And I think New Mexico as an 11 is about right. It just kind of depends to me for New Mexico whether you have them just barely hanging on to a 10 in that solid 11, or if you just happen to have a play-in game that's 12 because you think Drake and UC Irvine deserve 11s over a play-in game. I think that one's about right. I agree with you. I think we're looking at 3 potential tournament contenders. I don't really believe Boise State, Nevada, and Colorado State have much of a chance, if any chance, realistically. So the only 3 I'm actually interested in are going to be that Utah State, San Diego State, New Mexico grouping, and I think it's in that exact order.
I feel like I don't know if I'm overreacting to last year where we were all 3 seeds off on every single Mountain West team that the committee just hated them, that I keep like not wanting to put Utah State where I feel like they deserve. Every time I look at Utah State's resume, I'm like, man, they should be at least a seed line higher than I have them, but then I don't move them up. Are you in the same like that mental headspace? Because resume average, right? 20th, like that's solid. 3-0 quad one, 8-2 quads 1 and 2. Like those are easily among the best records in the country.
Yeah, I think for me, what could be a hangup for Utah State is in particular they don't have what I consider an elite win, and this is just a category I made up years ago, but I think it's proven that it's pretty valuable in the comparison process. If you have a home win over a top 3 seed, that's an elite win. If you have a neutral court win over a top 5 seed, that's an elite win. If you have a true road win over a top 7 seed, that's an elite win. Again, it's kind of fuzzy, but that's generally how I've regarded that the committee views those as being really, really good, very valuable wins. And for me, I think where they could potentially be having a bit of a problem as Utah State is they've got 2 very good wins at St. Mary's, at San Diego State, both very good. I think they need one of those 2 teams to get into that 7 seed range to change from being a very good win to an elite win. And now the committee can say, okay, not only do you have those great resume metrics, not only do you have those great quad splits, you have an elite win that shows you should be bumped up. Nevada didn't have that last year, and that caught everybody by surprise. How is Nevada a 10 seed? I was way off on Nevada. I think everybody was way off on Nevada, but that's something they didn't have. Nevada had lots of very good road wins last year. They didn't have a truly elite win. They were one of the only teams in the tournament to get in at large without an elite win. That could be holding Utah State back. And that's why I have them as an 8 seed. I think they need to get one of those wins becoming an elite win before they move further up the bracket.
Yeah, I can't disagree with anything you said there. Let me see, is BPI the lowest on the Mountain West again, or they corrected their altitude problems? They're pretty close. Nowhere near the divides we saw last year between BPI and Ken Palm. That's what we all turned to as the reason the Mountain West got left out. But last conference and the biggest of them, like if anybody's going to flirt with what the Mountain West did last year, it's the West Coast Conference this year. Could be a 2 bid league, could be a 5 bid league. I don't know where they're going to end up at. Right now Gonzaga and St. Mary's both in, although Gonzaga not so solidly in. Their resume metrics are really plummeting fast. Do you think this is, well, I'll give it over under 3. Would you bet on it, or is that a push?
I would say the line should be 2.5 would be where I put it. I think Gonzaga is probably in. I think St. Mary's is in good shape and bordering on that probably in. In fact, when I did my last tournament chances chart, I was really considering it. Are they a probably in team? Because I think they're very close to that, but their resume metrics are still a little bit of a concern. Lack of standout wins, I think, is a concern for the Gales. So I think St. Mary's is probably going to be making the tournament, but they're not quite in that comfortable space like I think Gonzaga is. And then beyond that, the one team that really is catching my attention and I think is maybe the most under talked about story of college basketball right now, Santa Clara is looking like a dark horse to actually make this thing as an at-large. And they've got 2 games coming up that could totally push them right there. Let me tell you a little bit about Santa Clara. Look at those quad splits. 1-0 in quad 1A, 2-2 in quad 1, 4-3 in quad 2, 6-5 overall against quads 1 and 2. Yes, they have 2 bad losses, but you expect a couple bad losses along the way when a team's playing in a mid-major league. It's almost inevitable because to win all of those games would be the really, truly shocking thing. So I think the committee will cut them a little bit of slack for those 2 bad losses. They have a true road win in Spokane. How many teams can say that? I think it's just 2 teams, right? Is that right? 2 teams have beaten Gonzaga in Spokane?
Like ever or this season?
This
Yeah, I
season,
think it's
1
two.
or
I can
2.
take a look. Yeah. Do, 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 do. I don't know. Oh, running out of time. We'll ignore that. Home losses. Yeah,
Just that,
only Santa Clara.
just Santa
Yep.
Clara. If they can go to the committee and say we were the only team in college basketball to beat Gonzaga and Spokane this year, huge, huge spot on the resume to prove that they're worthy of a. And Gonzaga right now is for a 9 seed for me. They could get into that 7 range. They could become not just a very good win, but an elite win. I think Santa Clara, forget the resume metrics. I really believe that for them. Forget the resume metrics. Look at what they've actually done. The opportunity is there. Santa Clara is a very serious contender for an at-large spot.
I agree wholeheartedly, although I'm trying to find them in the nitty-gritty. What's interesting is like even their bad win, or excuse me, their bad losses, right, aren't that bad. Uh, the loss at Loyola Marymount, their worst one, not even that far into quad three. That could be quad two with one decent LMU win. North Dakota State's 96 in the net. That's not a bad loss, and it was an overtime game, like it was tight. And then their other 2 bad losses are, quote unquote bad losses, are to AC. Why do I keep doing that? ACC's Stanford and Big Ten's Washington. Like those aren't bad losses. So I'm with you. Like even with their quad three losses, they're not as bad as some quad three losses can be. And like you said, that road win over Gonzaga, incredibly valuable. They're up to 27th on KPI, which is crazy to me. Highest ranking in any of the resume metrics for any of these West Coast Conference teams. I don't know what KPI is smoking instead of SOR and wins above bubble, but it's something. It's on the sheet and that helps their resume metrics average. I mean, they're almost in that, 57.5 range that we're looking for.
Yeah, what you generally see with KPI is they often rate very highly the teams that have done something very special. And that's what Santa Clara has done. They've picked up a lot of quality wins and a marquee win at Gonzaga. I think that's why KPI is rating them very highly. And then wins above bubble, conversely, is punishing them a little bit because they did lose a couple of games outside of those top 2 quads. But even look at the Washington State win in quad 3. Look at that St. Louis neutral court win. That was the first game of the season in South Dakota. Those are kind of quad 2 adjacent. Those have some value too. They're not great wins, but you start racking up some wins like that, all of a sudden adds a little bit of extra heft to the resume.
Yeah, let's take a quick peek at their upcoming schedule because normally, if you're one of the top 3 teams in the West Coast Conference, you don't have a whole lot to worry about. But so they still have after these games against Oregon State and St. Mary's in the next week. Obviously, those are both huge. I think they would both be quad 1, right? St. Mary's is 27th in the net, so that home game is quad 1. I know it has like the little Roman numeral 1 here, but that's based on Torvik rankings. But either way, it could end up being quad 1 games. These are the ones that you got to worry about. Can't lose any of those 3 to Pacific, Portland, San Diego. Like I think if they pick up one of their 5 opportunities the rest of the way and don't lose any of the bad games, I think they're probably in. I think they're getting really close.
Yeah, I think looking at that schedule at Oregon State, St. Mary's at home, at St. Mary's, home against Gonzaga, my gut says if they win 2 of those, they're probably going to make it.
And at Washington State too, even though they're not particularly in. I think that would be in that. If you get 2 of those 5, I think that's probably enough. Just
I
can't
think
lose to
at 2 out
Pacific.
of 5, I think it gets. I kind of think you're maybe on the barely outside. If you
Hmm.
win 3 of 5, I think you're in. If you win 2 of those 4 against quad one, I think you're probably in. But then you have that game at Washington State where that gets a little tricky.
Let's we got like 3 minutes left before it cuts us off, but let's keep pulling at that. Let's see what you decide to do the rest of the way thread and look at Gonzaga's schedule. Already two West Coast Conference losses, and they have not played either of their games against St. Mary's or San Francisco. What does Gonzaga? Let's assume they'll win the Portland game, the Loyola Marymount, the Pacific, the Pepperdine. They'll win those. What can Gonzaga afford to lose and not be in trouble?
I think Gonzaga, if they win those games, I think they can afford to lose probably 2 of the 3 games against St. Mary's and Santa Clara. If they lost all 3, I think they're probably on the outside looking in. If they win 2 of 3, I think they're in comfortably. But 1 of 3, I think they're probably in, but they're not going to be happy with their seed.
And you're assuming they'll win at Washington State, they'll win the rematch with Oregon State, they'll sweep San Francisco. You're just saying
Yeah, so I
so
guess
what,
that's, I mean,
like
there's
8-0 in those other games.
that's where it gets really interesting with the WCC is it's not usually this competitive. It's a
Right.
very deep conference this year. So I think normally we can just basically be like, how'd you do against St. Mary's? And that's really the only calculation. This year it's so deep that the calculations are going to be really difficult because there are quality wins there. Again, they're not going to be your smoking gun home win, but a home win over Oregon State, that's a quality win. You go on the road and beat Washington State, even if it's not quad one, that's a quality win. So I think it does get a little hard to do the math this year in the WCC compared to where it usually is.
Yeah, I mean, as interesting as Santa Clara is right now, right? If that game last night goes the opposite way, Washington State's right in the conversation. If San Francisco had beaten St. Mary's, the Dons are right there, and the Gales are probably on the outside looking in. So yeah, there's just a lot of interesting games in the WCC this year. Like I had that tweet the other day about St. Mary's that they've just been running up the scores and blowing out everybody, and then they've jumped from like 50th to 27th in the net. But they've been playing, and prior to last night, all their games were against these five teams that don't matter. Now they have to play, 9 more games against the other, 5 or 6 teams that actually are good. So I'll be interested to see, obviously that 0-0 record in quad one, that's going to change in a big way for St. Mary's, whether it becomes 2-5 or 0-7 or whatever. Like that'll dictate whether they get in, how good their seed is. I mean, if St. Mary's were to run the table, they could play their way up to like a 3 seed, and they're on the bubble right now. Like that's how strong the WCC is this year.
Yeah, I think for me, where it could get really dangerous for St. Mary's is they have been left out of the tournament by the committee
Yeah.
before for a bad out of conference schedule. And there's really no excuse to not have a single quad one game. You can say it's difficult to schedule. You could have found a quad one game if you really wanted it, St. Mary's. I'm not saying you played a terrible non conference schedule, but not having one quad one game by now is really on them.
Yeah. They did at least, which tournament was that they played USC and Arizona State? Is that like the Wooden Legacy or something? At least they did something. They got a few, what, 1, 2, 3, 4 games against major conference teams. That neutral against Nebraska, how is that not quad one win? That's got to be close. What Nebraska did Nebraska just slip from 50 to
Yeah, Nebraska
51 in the
just
net?
lost. They're right there because of that home loss to Rutgers.
Yeah. So they at least tried. Like there are years that they don't even leave the state of California. They just beat up on like the Big West and those types of teams. So they at least put something together. But yeah, it is weird that they don't have a single quad one game. But that's going to change for sure. Uh that's it. A lot of interesting games today, actually. I haven't even I think there are more teams on my spreadsheet playing today than there were yesterday, which is just bizarre. But I guess that's life without the Pac-12. There aren't really Thursday games anymore. But we'll have another busy weekend and then we'll be back maybe on Thursday for a change. I feel like we've kind of settled into a Friday routine here. But until next time, take care, enjoy the hoops, and we'll see you again soon.